Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Scottish Police Authority meeting here at COSLA in Edinburgh. We have no member apologies, declarations of interest and connections. As we all know, it's a requirement of our Code of Conduct that members declare any financial or other interests and connections in relation to the business for today's meeting. Can members confirm if there are any declarations of interest or connections? No? Okay. Chris.
Apologies, Chair. Yes, I was a member and Vice Chair of the Independent Review Group on Equality, Diversity, Inclusion and Human Rights, which I know features in one of today's reports. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for declaring that. Thank you. Do members wish to raise any other business? And then with regards to decisions taking business in private in accordance with Section 20 of our standing orders, can I ask members to confirm their content to take the following two items in private today? First of all, item 9, private minute of the meeting held in September, where we approved the appointment of Sarah Roughhead to the post of Chief Financial Officer, and item 10, which is the external annual audit report and the annual report and accounts, and we need to discuss that in private until it's laid in Parliament. So are members content to take these in private? Move on to the minute from the previous meeting, and we now have the draft minute from the last board meeting for approval. Subject to any comments, can I invite members to approve the draft minute of the last public authority meeting? People have any comments? No? Approve. Thank you. So the rolling action log, we have one action on the action log which stems from a discussion at the last board meeting regarding the policing of protests where there may be support for a prescribed organisation. And members have received a briefing which has been provided by authority staff explaining how organisations are prescribed under the Terrorism Act 2000. The briefing has been appended to the action log for transparency and enhances members' understanding of the prescription process. I am satisfied that with the information provided to the board by DCC Connors last month and this subsequent briefing which together clearly explains Police Scotland's approach and role. Can I ask members to confirm if they are content? And if so, that this action is closed on the action log. Thank you very much. And then as a related matter, I would like to reiterate the board's support and appreciation to Police Scotland's leadership team for their ongoing candour and commitment to scrutiny at our public board and committee meetings, not just for transparency in relation to the policing of protests, but for all matters for which they are held to account. And I think at our live streamed PPC, most recently, there was a lot of discussion and debate about data that we'd be bringing forward to further increase that openness and transparency. And public accountability in policing is intrinsically linked to trust and confidence in the service and strengthens relationships and cooperation. So thank you for that. So decisions since the last public authority meeting on the 21st of August. There have been no decisions taken via correspondence. And I'm now going to move us on to my chair's report. I'll take it as read, and there are two things I would particularly like to highlight. The first is the Independent Custody Visiting Annual Conference, which was held in Edinburgh on Saturday, the 6th of October. It was a hugely positive and informative day. We learned about trauma and its impact on people who are in police custody and what volunteers and staff working in custody centres can do to make their contact more person-centred and trauma-informed. And although the conference is very focused on the role and impact of volunteers, it was also very well attended by Police Scotland custody staff and the leadership team, and this was hugely valuable and added a richness to the discussions of the day. So I'd like to thank everyone who attended, the ICVS team for organising it, and Police Scotland for their involvement and engagement. And then secondly, it's not referred to in my report, but the Forensic Services hosted its annual Excellence Awards, I think a much anticipated day within Forensic Services on Friday the 19th of September. That took place after my report was submitted. It was truly inspiring, celebrated the abundance of excellence that exists in Forensic Services, and it's incredibly clear from the breadth and depth of the nominations that there is indeed much to celebrate. I was inspired reading and hearing about each and individual or team nominated, and they really are pacing each other to excellence, and they were all winners. So I'd like to thank Fiona Douglas, our Director of Forensic Services, for arranging these awards and giving the team an opportunity to showcase just what they do. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments people might have. No? Content? Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move on to the committee chairs' reports. So I'll ask each committee and group chair to talk to the report and invite questions from members if they have any. I'm going to hand over to Tom Halpin, both Policing Together Oversight Group and People Committee.
Thank you, Chair. If I'll begin with the People Committee. My report has been laid before you, and I take it that it's been read, and it covered a number of areas. Two areas that I would like to highlight is around the work in wellbeing, inclusion and health and safety, and the dashboard from that. And the committee explored that in detail, but are looking for more evidence of impacts going forward, and that was very positively received, and that I look forward to that coming in due course. The other area is around workforce strategic dashboard, and it'd be fair to say the data reflects the demand that's on policing at the moment, and we've asked for more information around REROS address days, etc. Those areas that would show the tension that's on the workforce. So that's work that will be ongoing. And the final point is around aligning the people strategy to the 2030 vision. So those were the big areas that were in discussion in the committee at that time. If it's okay, I'll go into the Policing Together, and then we can take questions of both, because they are linked. In the People Together Oversight Group, we heard details of the Policing in a Diverse Society training, and that was very encouraging, and we're going to have more a deeper look into what that's the learning that's coming from that. The other area is that the establishment now of the Independent Policing Advisory Council, and we're going to have some insight to the matters that are being considered in there, and that's important. And the other area, which I won't go into great detail just now, because there is an item later on in Policing Together around sex equality, tackling misogyny. We discussed that in great depth at the committee. We are satisfied that the actions and the issues that were raised in the report and that have been mapped across to the Policing Together action plan, and that are being addressed. But we'll hear more about that later in the meeting.
Thanks, Tom. Any comments or questions from members? No, I'll move on to Complaints and Conduct Committee with Katharina.
Very much, Chair. The committee met on the 4th of September, and as usual, we considered a range of performance assurance reports and updates, and I take my report as read, but maybe just two things to pull out from a performance perspective. So firstly, the committee was really pleased to see that there seems to be an increase in frontline resolution for complaints, which is really positive, because we always acknowledge that is better from a compliance point of view as well as from a resourcing point of view. So we very much hope that trend will continue. And secondly, from a complaints handling backlog, so the Operation Glade, again, we have received assurances that the measures which have been put in place, particularly in the last I would say 6 months, have started to see an impact. And we are seeing that the rates of the historic complaints which are being closed off increasing. So that, again, is a really positive trend. And again, this is something that we as a committee will be keeping a close eye on, and hope that trend will continue as well. So overall, I think really positive. And that despite the fact that obviously the summer has seen substantial resourcing challenges due to a number of really large-scale operations as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from members? No, but I think your point about seeing the reduction in delays of investigating complaints is hugely encouraging, and I think staff have to be commended for that, because we know how important it is, both for the member of staff that's had the complaint made against them, but also for the member of the public who is uneasy about the way things have handled. So that's good to hear. Thank you. I'm going to go over to Mary now with audit, risk and assurance.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, we had only 2 items to consider at our meeting on the 11th of September. The first of these was the annual audit report from our external auditors, Grant Thornton. This was a very positive report, and Grant Thornton did comment on the quality of the work that they had found when they did the audit, which was very helpful. We were more than content as a committee to recommend this annual audit report for approval today, and it's on the agenda later. as you know, we're not allowed to consider either that report or the annual report and accounts in public until such time as they have been laid before Parliament. You made reference to that, Chair. So they're on the private section of the business today. The second item we considered was the draft annual report and accounts, and again, a very professional set of documents, very well prepared. Actually, it sounds strange to say, but a bit of a good read for anybody who would find that interesting. The committee were very content that there were very, very minor changes from the original draft, and more than content again to recommend that for approval by the board today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I think we'll look forward to having that discussion in private later on today. Thank you. And in terms of committee chairs' reports, lastly, Alistair with the PPC.
Thank you, Chair. This meeting took place only last week on the 16th of September. I will take the report as read. The main items of business that were covered are the Policing Performance Report, Operational Matters, Partnership and Community Focus, an oversight of improvements in policing, and we looked ahead to the work plan for the committee. Just a couple of things to perhaps draw out. This was the first use of the new Performance and Accountability Framework for 25-26, and the committee recognised the significant improvement in this. It gives a much clearer picture, we believe, in terms of that oversight of strategic delivery, of the strategic plan, and also the vision going forward. There's one area that we believe still requires some further work, and that is the use of disaggregated data, though we did recognise the improvement there, particularly in terms of exception reporting and the opportunity to have deep dives into areas of significant public/local interest. So we really saw a significant improvement there in terms of the Policing Performance Report. And the other point I just want to draw out is the use of live facial recognition. This is something that is actively under consideration for use by Police Scotland, and what the committee would like going forward with this is some clarity on budget and on the plans for it, and that rights-based pathway approach that has been taken.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Members, any comments or questions? No, thank you very much. I'm moving on now to agenda item 5 and over to the Chief Constable's report, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Policing continues to respond to an intense operating environment illustrated by a high level of protest and counter-protest across the country each week. While the vast majority of these have been peaceful, there has been a challenging dynamics, and appropriate police planning and resource is required, placing pressure on our workforce. To provide a sense of the pressure, over the weekend just gone, around 280 officers, 35 sergeants and 10 inspectors were deployed in relation to demonstrations, including in Glasgow, Falkirk, Dundee and Perth, with similar levels of protest anticipated over the coming weekend. Of course, this has a cost to the organisation, but also a work-life balance pressure on officers who have rest days cancelled to do these duties. At the same time, officers and staff continue to investigate crime, secure answers for families, bring offenders to justice, powerfully underlined by the important criminal justice outcomes in relation to murders, attempted murder, terrorism offences, child sexual abuse, as well as arrests in connection with deaths and the ongoing Operation Portledge. In my report, I've highlighted enforcement action across retail crime and drug offences and partnership work to help keep students safe, aligned with the start of the academic year, as well as collaboration with Abertay University's Cyber Quarter, as we continue to develop capabilities to meet the ever-changing and more complex threats that we face. And as we approach the 10th anniversary of the implementation of the Domestic Abuse Disclosure Scheme for Scotland, my report outlines the significant work Police Scotland has undertaken with partners, including victim and survivor groups, to make disclosures which can empower women to leave potentially abusive relationships. I also set out work to better support victims as part of our efforts to build a trauma-informed criminal justice system, including training to take a person-centred approach to all our interactions. These examples provide insight into the broad and deep work of police officers, staff and volunteers right across the country, right around the clock. And I thank our people for their dedication, hard work and resilience. Supporting a thriving workforce is key to delivering effective policing for our communities, and I outline continued officer recruitment while also providing a welcome update on police staff pay, which follows an aligned award for police officers agreed in August. A thriving workforce also means one which better reflects, represents and serves all of our communities, and where those with different backgrounds and experiences are able to flourish as part of Police Scotland. We know policing, like all organisations and wider society, must face sexism, misogyny, racism and discrimination head-on. These are long-standing challenges which require constant vigilance, leadership and focus to safeguard our values and make further progress. The case for action has been made. This includes by Lady Eilish Angelioni, independent review of complaints handling, investigation and misconduct issues in relation to policing, and that was published in 2020, and by the findings of the independent review group established as part of those recommendations, including the deep dive on sex equality, tackling misogyny and violence against women and girls. The case has been illustrated through inspection reports by HMICS and through listening to our officers and our staff, including directly during face-to-face engagement and through more structured surveys and legal cases and conduct matters. Our response to these complex issues is delivered by our Policing Together programme, which was established in 2021 and has been led by Assistant Chief Constable Katrina Payton since last summer. I'd like to thank Katrina for the energy, passion and leadership and commitment she has brought to this important work since then. Policing Together considers all the reviews, inspection and evidence we receive, along with our joint strategy for policing, our vision for policing, and the legally required equality outcomes for policing in order to develop, coordinate and deliver meaningful action across the service which achieves real change. This allows us to group themes from various sources, reviews and findings and develop and take targeted action to address concerns while reducing duplication or resourcing initiatives which aren't a priority. We have a dedicated, significant resources working across themes of leadership, learning, communications and communities. And we've shared examples including face-to-face anti-racism training, the establishment of community advisors, and the Independent Police Advisory Council, among other work. Delivery against the evidence and the strategic alignment is coordinated through an implementation plan and then reported through the authorities' committees, and I've underlined my personal commitment to this vital progress since my appointment, and it is positive we have time dedicated today to our Policing Together progress report. As Chief Constable, I would underline that it is crucial progress is made and evidenced, whether through improved representation in our workforce, officers and staff, and them knowing our values and feeling able to call out unacceptable behaviour in a safe environment all that on each day, and that the day-to-day experience of policing are positive. This year's workforce survey is open and we've been encouraging people to take part, so we continue to build an evidence base about where change is being felt and where more needs to be done. And at the same time, we know some of Lady Eilish's recommendations required legislative change, and we're working to implement relevant aspects of the Police Ethics Conduct and Scrutiny Scotland Act 2025. My commitment is to ongoing leadership, focus and vigilance to safeguard our integrity and uphold our values. And I thank the authority and the individual board members for their leadership, support and challenge over a period of years in this area, including Tom Halpin as the chair of the Oversight Group and the People Committee, and Chris Cregan for his work with the Independent Review Group. In addition to appropriate pay and creating an environment where people can thrive and which delivers for all our communities, it is crucial we provide the tangible support which improves daily experiences of our officers and our staff and enables them to deliver for our communities. My report outlines how we are progressing to the next phase of police reform in Scotland to realise our vision of safer communities, less crime, supported victims and a thriving workforce, including through the ongoing rollout of body-worn video and the transformation of our building estate. In the coming weeks, we'll implement a strengthened community policing model in Forth Valley Division to provide visible, identified officers who can better connect with communities and build confidence in policing, work with communities to solve the problems that matter to them and prevent crime and antisocial behaviour, and improve the timeliness and the quality of our investigations with a victim-centred approach. Enhanced community policing is essential to nurture our relationships with communities, to maintain the confidence to report crime, assist investigations, provide intelligence, and to ensure the principles of policing by consent. Hard-won efficiencies achieved through technology, work with the criminal justice partners and health colleagues, as well as releasing experienced police officers from roles which don't need warranted prowess through workforce modernisation, continue to be driven with rigour and are essential to contribute to the capacity needed to deliver our vision for policing. However, there are indications the operating environment is intensifying, that our workforce and that policing performance is under pressure, including the public's confidence to report crime and in policing's ability to reduce harm through prevention and proactivity. I've been clear that delivering safer communities, less crime, supported victims and a thriving workforce will require support, and we are working with the authority and in communication with Scottish Government around policing's resource requirements over the coming years. Developing areas of demand, including increasingly complex demands that the within an intensifying operating environment, and the pressure on our workforce has informed my view that investment is required to strengthen our resilience against terrorism and organised crime, protect our children from online abuse and exploitation, and to continue to investigate cold cases and engage with the public and fatal accident inquiries. Investment will enable us to successfully embed a strengthened community policing model across Scotland, vital to underpin our national and specialist response. This month, we provided written evidence to the Criminal Justice Committee to inform their pre-budget scrutiny ahead of the Scottish Government's budget for 26-27. The evidence underlines the success of policing reform in Scotland since 2013 and seeks ongoing support for the second phase to build a modernised workforce able to keep pace with developing demand, deliver for our communities to reduce vulnerability and harm and keep people safe from the threats of today and those coming down the line. I'll stop there, Chair, and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. As always, Chief Constable, that your report is incredibly valuable and your highlights also. So I have a number of board members who have indicated they wish to ask a question, and then I'll open it up to other board members from other aspects. Alistair, I'll hand over to you first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report, Chief Constable. As always, it gives a strong indication of the width and the depth of work that Police Scotland are involved in. I have two questions for you today. The first one comes under the heading of safer communities, and I note there the drugs offence enforcement that's taken place. And at the Policing Performance Committee, we got an update on the number of occasions that police officers and staff had administered naloxone. And as we all know, Scotland has an unenviable record in terms of drugs deaths. It was good to see in the recent figures that there's a slight reduction on that. but the reasons behind it are, of course, multifaceted and complex. So I just wonder if you could comment further on the role that Police Scotland are taking to tackle drugs deaths in Scotland, as well as enforcement, as well as naloxone. Is there anything else that you're doing? And my second question is in relation to the comments you make on the rights-based pathway. And as I mentioned in my report earlier, live facial recognition is something that is currently under consideration, and that approach will be taken. So I just wondered what your thoughts were on how the rights-based pathway operates in practice, and where does it feature in your final decision making?
Thank you. Thanks for that, Alistair. So I'll start with the drugs deaths, and Alan will pick up some additional detail. We're still, unfortunately, at a position across the country where over 1,000 people died through drug-related deaths in 2024. So not missed on any of us that over 1,000 families lived with the consequences of drugs across the country. And I think that the approach that we take is very comprehensive and talks specifically to issues of how we disrupt and enforce and pursue those involved in criminality, in pushing drugs, often that is well organised and often emanates from both within the UK and more broadly, but also in relation to the excellent partnership work that's taking place together with colleagues in public health and the vigilance and the networks that we have in place in order to identify trends where significant harm is potentially going to happen. So Alan will pick up the additional detail, but as you know, and it's been reported through Performance Committee, a real focus around our approach, like I say, both from an enforcement point of view, but also with that broader public health approach to how do we actually prevent these deaths and the associated health consequences that go with it.
Thanks very much, Chief. Thank you, Alistair. And DCC Connors might touch on some of the operational activity that we're undertaking within Police Scotland. But if I focus firstly on partnerships, so substance harm prevention is a critical part of the Policing Together portfolio. It's all about partnership and collaboration. We have a dedicated team around substance harm prevention, and we work, as the Chief has indicated, very closely with a range of partners, but in particular Public Health Scotland. You may be aware that we have a Police Scotland drug strategy, and that is what we're working towards. To paraphrase the kind of key themes that would come from that strategy, it's about information sharing, it's about minimising impact on local communities, maximising opportunities to reassure those communities, to look at how we improve referral pathways, and finally it's around how do we improve understanding and think about lived experience and the stigma around misuse. Practically, what does that mean within Police Scotland? So we have a number of forums where we see divisional superintendents engaged in that prevention work, and that is coordinated through Policing Together. But a big part for us is about improving technology, and that's about how do we share information quicker across the partner network, but also into local communities. So we have improved that technology. We're using some AI data belt technology that allows us to try and accelerate the sharing of information. So we'll be looking at the clustering of drugs deaths, the clustering of near-death instances, and trying to draw that data. We then pull into that our use of naloxone, and to date we've seen naloxone administered over 800 times, and every operational officer in Police Scotland continues to carry naloxone. So that's bringing great benefit, but it's something that has to be done in partnership, and those collaborations at this point in time are really strong.
Thank you. And thank you very much for the question. Just to build on some of the points that Alan has made, particularly from a kind of disruption and an enforcement element, As the Chief has said, the harm that drugs causes in our communities is absolutely huge. We look at it from different lenses, which is enforcement. We need to look at protection, prevention, and obviously ongoing education as well, very much working in partnership. Some of the successes we've had when we look at some of the high harm individuals, serious and organised crime, those that are using pill presses to produce tens of thousands of tablets with all of the different precursor materials. We've had some real success in tackling some of that, finding some of those pill presses and then taking those drugs out of the communities. We've seen nitazines and the potency of some of the chemicals that go with that start to increase. We've talked many times previously about nitazines and the potency of them and the issues that we have with drugs deaths that relate to nitazines. So again, a focus for us is around that type of lab. We actually had a nitazine lab in Ayrshire that policing found, and it's the first one in the UK, and we believe that having taken some of those and the pills off may well have contributed to a 41% reduction in benzodiazepine, which is another type of drug that we're focusing on. So all that sits in the kind of enforcement space. That links very much to local officers. How are they linking with our local communities, understanding what's going on, and particularly looking at vulnerability as well. We see that in particularly in county lines, particularly up on the north area, up in Aberdeen and some of our northern areas. In June 25, we had the County Lines Intensification Week. We've played through some of the results of that. And that wasn't just about the success of actually seizing the drugs, but we actually had 172 vulnerable people safeguarded as a result of that work. And I link back to, our focus on the supply. Where are the different drugs coming in? Where are all the component parts of the drugs coming in? Where are they being manufactured? But always coming back to that local element and how do we support our local communities? In particular, in A Division and N Division, they work very closely with local authority social work, housing to do joint proactive visits, because we need to be able to deny access in our communities to the most vulnerable people that are exploited as a result of drugs. And again, following on from what Alan said, partnership alerts, very quick ability to get into communities and let people know if there is an issue with a drug or there is a problem. We're much more open with that, working with partnerships. So again, really tackling the high end, the high harm supply, and then working that through and making sure that we do that prevention element in the local communities as well. Thank you.
So to move on, in relation to live facial recognition and rights-based pathway. So just in relation to where we've come to, with the authority's support, we entered into a series of conversations and consultations around the use of the technology that I know concerns some people in terms of privacy. Moving forward, having captured that information, I see the use of the rights-based pathway being a continual check and balance for us as we consider what the deployment of that technology would look like, what are the benefits from a public safety point of view, and how we use both the information that we've received so far, but ongoing consultation with the public, so that we are in the best position to make an informed position in relation to the deployment of live facial recognition. But and we've touched on this at the committee before, use of technology to ensure that we identify those who are causing harm in our communities is one of our priorities. At the same time, technology is being used by individuals in order to exploit particularly the vulnerable. So I am very keen that we learn lessons from our colleagues across policing in the United Kingdom, but we use and we progress the development of a business case in a sensitive and appropriate manner, upholding our values with a constant check around that rights-based pathway that we don't just use when considering live facial recognition. We're using it across a number of tactics and capabilities in policing to ensure that we maintain people's human rights, and that we ensure that we've got the ongoing confidence and trust of our communities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. You satisfied? Any follow-up from board members on that? No, I'll hand over to Pauline, please.
Thank you very much for your report, very, very informative. I've got two areas of question, one on enhancing community policing and one on estates. In respect of enhancing community policing, mentioned on page 3 and 4 of your report, I wonder if you could explain further what difference in additional investment in community policing will make, what will be the public experience, and how workforce modernisation will contribute to that.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. Trust and confidence in policing is one of our top and key indicators, and that is born out of, I believe, people's sense of safety. Do they feel safe in their communities? Do they think that different bodies, that the police have focus and care for them? Do they know that if they call us, we'll be there to support them? And are we seen as the guardians of safety and security across communities, on high streets, in rural areas? So that's the basis on which we had looked and have looked at our community policing footprint. In the development of other capabilities across Police Scotland, what we see is that we have different levels of coverage of our community policing teams, and I think our ongoing success and our ability to deliver against the vision will be based on a combination of things, but one of them is a strong, visible and enhanced community policing footprint. Important for the points I've made so far, but also important, and we've touched on it this morning when talking about drugs, that we then form part of that visible partnership effort at a community level. So whether we're talking about vulnerability and working with local authorities in terms of concern hubs and people who are vulnerable across communities, whether we're working with the enforcement arm of local authorities around issues of antisocial behaviour, whether we're working in schools around education, we are seen, and we are proud of the fact that we are seen as key leaders in that space, bringing together partners and acting as a conduit. And by doing that together, we tackle issues of vulnerability, exploitation, and we get under some of the issues that can have significant impact on individuals if they go unmet. So very much a proactive and problem-solving approach. And I think the public want to see our ability to demonstrate that we're effective, and when they see their neighbours dealing drugs, they want us to do something about it. When they witness antisocial behaviour and they have that sense of fear in relation to going out, they want us there and visible, and they want to know who that local officer is. But as Jane said when we were talking about drugs, community policing is the foundation, and it sits in an ecosystem of broader policing, and we've touched on some of that together already today. But it is part of that overall, I suppose, ecosystem of policing. Enables us to identify tensions early. I think we'll go on and talk later around protest and cohesion. And again, as national and international events and politics affects what we're seeing on the streets of Scotland, I see community policing as key in relation to that cohesion and keeping communities together and dealing with tensions. In terms of workforce modernisation, that from previous discussions here and at other committees, my aspiration is that we have police officers, warranted officers doing frontline policing roles, and we've demonstrated good evidence of where we've returned officers to the front line of policing, and often they're experienced officers, which is really, really positive. And that we develop a police staff workforce that has the expertise to tackle and support us in dealing with some of the new threats that we're seeing, predominantly driven by technology being exploited by criminals, but at the same time, the reach that people are able to generate using that technology. So not just policing in Edinburgh, but policing across Scotland, the UK, Europe, and internationally. And we see that every single day, that our reach is far beyond just the boundaries of the country.
In terms of estates modernisation, thanks very much for your helpful update on progress around implementation of the estates master plan. As we know, this is a 10-year programme of significant modernisation. And I wonder if you could explain further the detail of the implementation arrangements and when those might come back to the authority, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Pauline, for the question. I think on reflection, one of the gaps that we've identified within Police Scotland is their ability around skills and experience and transformation of the estate. And since we last met, we have appointed a Chief Estates Officer, Donna Valens. Donna is a hugely senior and experienced estates transformation person who's came across from banking, and she's now into week 4 of her appointment, and I think that will already seen massive benefits with the experience she brings. I think the short answer to your question is that our intention would be to come to the next Resources Committee, and along with Donna, we will present to you a really detailed plan and a roadmap for implementation around estates. I think what I can say today is that looking at our current year, we are on track to deliver the £33 million capital spend this year, which is positive. We have a number of large capital projects ongoing in Dundee, Lanarkshire and Rothesay. And in addition, we committed to 11 significant refurbishments across the force, and that now is making real progress in year. Phase 3 of the master plan, the appointment of a delivery partner was really important to us, and we have now made that appointment. And I think in addition, going forward to the next Resources Committee, two of the kind of key other business as usual projects, if you like, are FETIs, and we'll bring an outline business case to the Resources Committee there, and we'll bring you a substantial update in relation to Jackton and our desire to acquire that facility, which will support training and recruitment. So I think we'll see significant progress as we support Donna in this role, but I can give you the assurance that we'll have a detailed report for yourself and others at the Resources Committee.
Chief Constable.
Can I just add? Thank you, Alan. Just add a couple of points to that. We'll see some savings in relation to some of the decisions we're making around our buildings, which we'll be able to reinvest. But two key additional points for me. In terms of that thriving workforce, the investment in the estate is key to people knowing that we care about the environment they're working in. And you know, sitting around the room, some of the poor quality of our estate. And I don't want our officers and staff and volunteers working in those environments. And at the same time, I don't want the public coming to a building where it looks as though we don't care. So twofold, modern, positive environments for people to work in based on the role that they're undertaking, but also that the public and local people see Police Scotland investing in their local area. And it talks to my point before around community policing, and somebody cares and has control, and you can go to them if you're in need. So really important. And just to reiterate what Alan said there, in terms of the appointment of Donna Balance. It moves us a huge way forward, and exciting in terms of what we're going to be able to do moving forward. Thank you.
Content. I'll move to Katerina now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable. You opened your report, your statement today, giving us a sense of the amount of protests and counter-protests up and down the country, and I think that's really incredibly helpful. And I think Police Scotland has got a very good reputation for managing protests and counter-protests. So particularly against that backdrop, it is a little bit puzzling that there was a peaceful protest outside of the Scottish Parliament on the 4th of September, organised to urge the Scottish Government to act on the Supreme Court ruling around the definition of Sex and Equality Act from April. So what effectively happened is there was a counter-protest, and the policing of that protest and the counter-protest has attracted quite wide-ranging criticism, including it being then debated on the 9th of September in the Scottish Parliament. A question was asked about the policing response to that. And I think the criticism was that by not policing the counter-protest effectively, it was effectively infringing on the rights of the protesters to conduct their protest. So I've got two questions. I mean, one is specifically to this particular incident. I don't know if there's anything that you could say, but more broadly, and I think this is relevant for all of the protest activity, can you maybe give us an indication as to how the positive duty of the state to facilitate protests, so to take reasonable steps to enable peaceful demonstrations, to proceed and to protect the participants, not just refrain from interfering with them. How does this feed into Police Scotland's standard operating procedures, training, and just generally attitude to protest? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really important question, and an opportunity for us to talk in detail. So DCC Connors will work through that, including the response around the 4th of September.
Thank you very much. And as you said, thank you very much for the question. And you do highlight, police does have a positive duty to facilitate protest, as well as a duty not to obstruct. So they are different sides of the coin, but it puts an onus on us to be able to get that balance. If I talk about kind of the training and answer that more broadly question, and then I'll come on to the incident, if I may. As we know, and you've highlighted, Police Scotland does have a significant history of policing protest and supporting human rights. And that is a fundamental basis. That actually starts when people begin at the college, when they're recruits. We do a significant amount of training around human rights, about values. So it's not simply when people turn up for protests, it's actually embedded and starts from the very beginning when people attend the college. As part of our officer safety training, part of that is around CARES, which is a mnemonic for communication, awareness, rapport, empathy and support. And I think it's important to show that as part of our standard officer safety training, our ability to look for de-escalation, opportunities for communication and engagement are absolutely fundamental. And again, it shows the broader impact and the thoughts that we have about people and how we communicate with them rather than just focusing on the protest. Public order refreshers, which is obviously our public order officers, again, that CARES features as well. You'll be aware of the Act Don't React training that we've talked about here before. That's a behavioural science, and it teaches people how and why we react the way that we do, and then how to manage that reactions. We've seen a 17% less use of force, 29% less injuries and 49% less complaints with people who have had that training. So again, the fundamental building blocks of how we behave in any situation, including protest. And I think one of the reasons for mentioning the kind of Act Don't React is that, the Chief Constable has talked about the significant demand that we put on our officers. 300 odd officers out last weekend, cancelling rest days again this weekend. And our officers are required to remain professional. They are required to think about what they're dealing with. But it does place significant demand. And when protest is complex and there's counter-protest, we rely on their training for them to be able to consider each individual group and be able to work that through. Public order officers get specific training in Article 10, which is freedom of expression. Article 11, which is freedom of assembly, and the other human rights articles. So at public order training and refresher training, they specifically get an increased input on that because they are more often the officers who will be dealing with some of the more complex, perhaps more fractious protests around it. All of our action needs to be proportionate, necessary, legal and accountable, and each officer must be able to do that. I think one of the other important things is our training involves scenario-based training. It's not just words on a page, it's something that people then have to put into practice, and the scenarios go from simple to more complex around those different areas. It also includes recent legislation training, for example, the Hate Crime or the Public Order Act. So we're constantly trying to make sure, and I think partly coming to your point, do officers understand the legal basis that they're working on when they're at protest and the rights that people have throughout that. If I move on just a little bit to talk about event planning, when we're planning different events, we have the command structure who have a highly more level of training. We have briefing notes. We make sure that there's legal frameworks people understand. But also what's really important is the style and tone. The Gold and the others will set the style and tone for an operation, and that will always focus on being able to facilitate protest and not obstruct protest in the way that you've already highlighted. I think UpRoll was a really good example of where we had specific briefing areas on the internet that people could access really quickly to see that. We do understand that protest can be complex, it can be emotive and it can be challenging, but all of these different areas I think will show that our actual human rights, considerations and training, de-escalation and communication feeds through all of that. I think in relation to the specific event on the 4th of September, we absolutely acknowledge the concerns and the complaints that were raised with regards our policing of that protest activity. I'd like to offer reassurances to the public and yourselves that we are reviewing the circumstances of that protest. We've already had engagement between the Edinburgh Division and the Professional Standards Division to ensure that the complaints are being considered in the round. And we will engage further when we've got more detail and make sure we provide significant updates. And again, just reassurance that if any learning identified through that, we will absolutely feed through back through our training mechanisms. So thank you.
Comprehensive update. Thank you.
Okay, any follow-ups? No, so I'll pass over to Chris, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. Your report touches on suicide prevention. I particularly wanted to highlight that and make a comment and ask a question. Your report refers to the 3 regional events which were held on World Suicide Prevention Day. And myself and Tom Halpin, on behalf of the authority, had the privilege of attending one of those events at Tullyallen, which featured a showing of the Low Road, as you know, and was attended by officers and staff and families and so on, as you refer to. It was an important event. I'm sure they were all important events, and it was enormously impactful, I think, for all of us who were there. And I think for me, and for Tom, I know as well, the event underlined the critical importance of the workforce approach to suicide prevention that your report refers to, and in particular to the importance of supporting people to seek help, and we heard about Lifeline support. I wondered if you wanted to comment any further on that, on that approach, and in particular, I think how a workforce approach in terms of supporting our officers and staff can underpin and contribute to a public health approach to policing and to suicide prevention in wider Scottish society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. Alan will pick up the detail in response to that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Chris, and thank you for the comments around the events that we held on World Suicide Prevention Day. We some time ago commissioned the production of the film The Low Road, which was to support and tackle some of the challenges around suicide, and it's a production that we would want to showcase more, and we're looking at every opportunity, both inside and outside the organisation, for the use of that material, which is hugely impactful. I think first and foremost, this is an enormously complex area, and I would want to give board members the assurance that we are really well connected at a UK level So there is a National Suicide Advisory Group that we would participate on, and there is also a National Police Chiefs Council steering group which looks at this from a UK perspective. Again, it's another partnership work stream that sits within the Policing Together portfolio, and when we come back into force, there are a range of activities that are ongoing, not only to impact officers and staff within the organisation, but with the communities that we serve. So we have a collaborative review group. Every division has a suicide prevention collaborative review group, and that's led by local superintendents. Within the mental health task force is another area. We're working closely with the National Police Chief Council around the production and creation of some guidance around bereavement for suicide, and importantly as a partnership. So we work very closely with Public Health Scotland, but in addition we've also got a tripartite prevention group which we do with Ambulance Service and the National Health Service, and the purposes of that forum is about collaborative prevention opportunities and also the ability to share good practice. There's a recent pilot being launched in Aberdeen, Moray and Angus, and that's looking at bereavement support. So I think we're really as active as we can be in that space and working very, very closely with partners and looking at the impact both inside and outside the organisation.
Thank you very much indeed. Tom Halpin.
Thank you. I'm really encouraged pardon me, in your report the partnership with Abertay around cybercrime, and I do reflect that cybercrime permeates life now. It's, so many different levels of activity. The area that I'd like to explore our preparedness in is in terms of the major attacks that we're seeing most recently in airports, but we've seen it Jaguar Land Rover disrupting the economy. We've seen it in the retail sector, Marks and Spencer's. It's cost huge amounts of money. So in terms of safeguarding Scotland, where are we today in terms of those sorts of attacks, and what advice can we give from police in Scotland, or is it a wider UK response only?
Thank you. Thanks for that question. Jane will probably come in a minute, but just to your point, Tom, in terms of the partnership arrangements we've now established with Abertay, really a key strategic partnership in terms of the I was going to say new threat, but it's been with us some time in relation to fraud and cyber, but is constantly evolving, and as part of our approach to these threats, we built our fraud and cyber unit, which is led by Chief Superintendent Andy Patrick. But clearly it needs a partnership approach, and there is a huge amount of expertise within the university which we will learn from, we will collaborate with, and we will look to develop some of the prevention techniques and focus and capabilities to try and deal with some of these things. I mean, just by way of a statistic, we are currently recording and investigating 50 fraud crimes a day. So that just gives you a sense. I think it's better than a percentage. It gives you a sense of the impact, and of course that comes in many forms. Lots of it focused in relation to either young people or over 65s, and comes in many forms. Exploiting people out of money, their personal data, information, and often involving issues around blackmail and extortion. But to your point, Tom, around cybercrime, and quite rightly highlighted some of the very high profile cyber attacks. So in broad sense, and clearly some of this is sensitive, and we could give a further briefing if necessary. But as an organisation, twofold really, absolutely recognising the data that we're holding, Lots of it is sensitive, lots of it is personal, and I have a responsibility to ensure that is kept safe and secure, and part of the responsibilities of our digital division under Andrew Hendry is the safety and security and vigilance of our systems and our data, and there are capabilities and tactics where we are constantly assessing and being able to make a judgment as to who is interested in our systems and our data in broad terms, and clearly the technical element of that is far more complex than I'm describing now. So we have a vigilance and early warning system, and we're monitoring that all of the time. Some of the investments we're making in the digital space seeks to ensure and improve the security, and at the same time giving advice through our cyber and fraud team to other organisations, agencies, supporting them, and people will have heard of ethical hackers. So you give somebody the permission, and we can facilitate this to see how easy it is to get into your digital technology and therefore identify vulnerabilities, and we support companies and businesses in relation to that. We also have a number of partners that we work with in terms of from an investigative point of view. So an attack happens on another public body or a private company, and we will support in terms of investigation, identifying those people responsible and giving that advice around prevention in the future. So a growing and complex but really, really important area of work. 10 years ago we talk about security of the buildings, which is important, but this is the new threat that we're facing. Did you want to?
Yeah, I'll probably only just add a couple of bits. I think the Chief has given a comprehensive answer. In relation to cybercrime, we look at cyber-dependent, which can only be committed using digital and technology, which is the malware, the ransomware, which is the type of thing that commercial companies see. And then you've got cyber-enabled, which is where traditional crimes like fraud, ID theft or stalking are scaled up. So there are different areas of it. I think, as the Chief has said, it's really important that we're in the prevention space, the education space, and especially with the Cyber and Fraud Centre of Scotland, that's where lots of different agencies, particularly commercial companies, will come in. In the old days, people wouldn't share information about attacks that have happened. I think that is what has started to shift significantly with the sharing of information, the sharing of intelligence, so we can understand what the threats are and then get ahead of them. As the Chief has said, AI is coming through an awful lot more. It makes scams a lot easier. So there's a number of areas where we're working to make a more cyber resilient society, as well as with companies as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Just to follow up, it's a complex area. Do we still have underreporting of this? If a small company receiving such an attack, do they still contact the police, or is there another partner that they go to, just to be very clear to the public?
So we do see underreporting. The Scottish Criminal Justice Survey, as well as some of our own data, tells us that people do underreport. Some of that is from individuals. They feel embarrassed. They feel ashamed. They think it's low level. So on an individual basis, we see underreporting. We also see underreporting from the commercial or the company side, but that is significantly starting to improve, particularly in the banking and the financial sector, where they come together more. So we are seeing a big shift on that. And the fact that we now have our cyber investigation teams based in the areas of Abbottay, and as we know with Abbottay, that gives us access to academic expertise, looking at some of the digital threats. They do a lot of public outreach and joint initiatives as well, so that we can share understanding and help people identify. And I think that's where the confidence from companies with that collaboration with academia, and as the Chief has said about ethical hackers, we are starting to see a slowing of the underreporting, but it's still prevalent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from members? No, can I ask about the investigation into brothel keeping, please? I think it was a couple of meetings ago, and I think it was Operation Petunia we were advised on. Is this a particular area within the Lothians, or is this work carried out across Scotland at the moment?
It's actually, so yeah, Operation Begonia is an operation that carries out across the whole of Scotland. We've seen it, we've run it in Glasgow, Aberdeen, we've got Dundee, we've also got a focus on Edinburgh. What's really essential is that we look at the perpetrators who are looking to buy sex from different areas. And also, I think, and it was in one of the bills, which is focusing on victims, those who are exploited into the sex industry. And being able to look at them as victims and work in partnership around that. So it's very much in twofold. So we tackle on-street prostitution and the sex industry, but look at, and there's far more legislation in those areas than there are in terms of some of the brothel keeping. And what was in the speaking notes was an operation that was run in Edinburgh around that and looking at brothels. So for us, it's very much being able to look at perpetrators, tackle that, look at it from a human trafficking point of view and an exploitation point of view, and provide with partners the right support for those within the sex industry and those that are victims and they need safeguarding and vulnerability. We work into that as well. So to come back to your question, it is something that we do across the whole of Scotland. There are particular areas where we see, again, a prevalency for that, and we're working with multi-agency to work with that.
That's helpful. Thank you very much indeed. So, Chief Constable, thank you. I think we've rehearsed quite a lot of the work. I think it's showcased the complexity that both individual officers, but you as the leadership team and the service as a whole have to deal with. I'm very grateful to you all for that, but that's been helpful. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to hand over to Chief Executive now.
Thank you, Chair. I have an update for the committee, and it's in line with the annual report and accounts. At the time of writing this report, we were awaiting some information to do with assurance around pension schemes from third parties. That has now been received and has been resolved to the satisfaction of our auditor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Angela, do you have a question for Chief Executive?
Thank you, and thanks for the report, Lynn. I just wanted to ask about the best value audit and inspection. I know there's been a huge amount of work that's gone into that, and I appreciate that there's a limit to what you can say at this point, given that it has to go to Parliament first. But is it possible just to say anything further on the emerging findings? I'm sure that they'll be mirrored to some extent in the annual audit report, but I just wondered if there's anything that we might hear about today.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. There are constraints around what I can say because it has to be when the report is led in Parliament. But what I can say is that, and in fact now there will be a joint qualitative review by HMICS and Audit Scotland on these initial findings. What I can say is that from my perspective, I think the authority will be assured. I think you will find the comments and the findings are fair, and that the areas for improvement, you would recognise them, and in fact it's areas that you've been asking as a board that you would like looked at. You have referred to the annual report and accounts, which again have to be considered in private. There is information on that, and we can touch on that in the private session. But from my perspective, across the three pillars, ourselves, obviously Police Scotland and Forensics, it is quite positive, and I think you will be assured in the findings.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions for the Chief Executive? No? Well, I think I'll stop us for a break now, and that's, if we could come back at 11:25, please. Welcome back, everyone. And I'm going to move straight into our Policing Together progress report. I don't know, Chief Constable, do you want to say anything before handing over to ACC Peyton?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say we welcome the opportunity at the board today to talk about the work and the progress in terms of policing together. Really important opportunity for Katrina to take you through the detail and hopefully provide reassurance that we are moving in the right direction, but that cultural change is something that doesn't move quickly, but welcome the debate following the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Katrina.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Chief. I probably would just like to start by echoing the Chief's gratitude for the board giving time to this important subject today. I remain firm in my belief that how we use our time is the greatest reflection of what matters to us. And of course, how we police is the basis for how we build trust in communities. And for me, the Policing Together programme is exactly that. How do we make people feel about policing, both internally and externally? So the programme really is critical because policing truly needs to be for everyone. Many of you will know, I have said it before, I've made no secret of the fact that had it been in my gift to choose any portfolio within policing, this is the one that I would have chosen. And I remain firm also in that fact that Policing Together provides us with that real opportunity to demonstrate that policing truly is for everyone. I shared ahead of this meeting a newly formatted report, our performance report, supported by an introductory paper. And I'm sure you've had a chance to read it, and I look forward to some of the questions. But there's a few things that I wanted to highlight that I think are really worthy of note. And I'm going to start, as the report starts, by setting the context. I've mentioned before that true information out of context loses its truthful meaning, so it's really important that we understand the historical context within which Policing Together is currently operating. And of course, this board know full well that in May 2023, our former Chief Constable, and now also affirmed by Chief Constable Farrell, that we as an organisation acknowledged institutional racism and discrimination. But the point I wanted to highlight to the board today was the other part in that statement to the board in 2023 said, recognising institutional discrimination and racism is a statement of reality. The real challenge and the real test is what we're going to do about it. Practically, how are we going to bring that to life for our communities? And so I want to start, before going into elements of the report, to assure the board that our focus has been about bringing policing together to life, policing together in practice, as we refer to it often, taking what we know is needing done from all of the listening that we've had, to prioritising the interventions and the delivery that's needed, and then also to seeing the signs of tangible progress. So it's those three stages that bring it to life. The Chief has already mentioned that culture change takes time. Some of you, again, will have heard me say very much that the one thing we need when we're dealing with this really challenging environment is patience and perseverance. But actually what makes patience and perseverance easier is when we're able to bring to life and to show the progress, the tangible steps that we're starting to make, that brings optimism and hope, even within the realms of the challenges that we still experience. So as an outset for me, I want to emphasise that we had that statement of acknowledgement, but translating that into practice isn't about believing in it. It isn't about the words that we say. It's about what we're going to do about it. And what we've done about it is invested significant resource. I'm testament to that as a chief officer leading this programme of activity. I'm supported here today by Dr. Victor Alisi, our Strategic Equalities Advisor, and we've merged our division. You've heard a lot of other programmes of work that's ongoing in Policing Together that touches in that felt experience for our people. We've had to create structures and governance approaches, and I'm obviously grateful for the accountability and the support that I get from the Policing Together Strategic Oversight Group, being a very clear example. And of course, the work that we have done, and I'll touch on that in a bit more detail, in relation to tackling sex equality and tackling misogyny. And we've invested in systems and processes, and again, the report draws them out, and I'll touch on a couple of examples from them. But how do we know? How do we know that we're heading in the right direction? And we need to be able to invest in systems and processes like our culture dashboard, and as the Chief Constable has committed to an annual survey going forward. So all of these things have been established since that public statement of acknowledgement as to where we were as an organisation. And they provide us with that tangible foundation to be able to translate the strategy and our desire into practice. The introductory paper that supports the performance report captures a condensed timeline from that statement, and actually preceding that statement, about the range of ways in which we have heard the really tough messages about, our organisation and the felt experience from within our staff and indeed some of the communities. And the important part of that drawn out in the paper is that our focus has been to listen and to understand. And I just want to assure this board that all of those sources of information, whether that's been interactions, whether that's been audits or inspections or reviews, all of that information has helped us to create and shape the programme of activity that we've got ongoing, and also to continue to review that and to continue to see, are we still heading in the right direction. Bringing all of that together and listening to all of those views has been really critical to us, and you'll know, because it was mentioned earlier in the meeting, that it also included the deep dive report into sex equality and tackling misogyny. That work also has helped to form the work that we have now as part of our programme and part of our implementation plan. But of course, listening isn't we've listened, now we're going to move on and do. Listening is ongoing, and we have to continue to listen. I met with the authors of the report and spoke about their understanding and their appreciation of the work that we are continuing to do. And we need to continue to be able to pull from all of our resources that ability to listen. And again, I'll go back to emphasising that the Chief has committed to an annual survey which continues to allow us to have that conversation with our staff. For myself, I chair, along with my colleagues in HR, a collaboration group meeting where we bring together our statutory and non-statutory associations and our engagement and insights team, and I'll touch on some examples later, are doing a plethora of work around finding new ways to understand people's perspectives and to understand, are we connecting in the right way to enable us to have that true understanding of how people feel. And the report then draws out that obviously we've heard lots, we have been listening, we continue to listen, but it's a cluttered landscape at times when you get lots of different perspectives and views. And the question that we need to ask is, are we making progress, and how do we know? And our means to do that was a significant mapping exercise of all of those pieces of information to provide us with one implementation plan. There's nothing been lost in that. We've got 6 master actions, 75 tasks, and every single one of them captured there to help us understand where are we and how do we know if we're starting to make progress. And you'll see from the actual performance report itself, it covers our equality outcomes, it covers thematic updates, it covers the tracker of that implementation plan, it gives the opportunity to touch on exception reporting as we start to build more of the information and data within our culture dashboard. And all of it is designed for us to be able to ask the exam or answer the exam question, which is, our vision for Policing Together says that we will be welcoming, inclusive, representative, that our staff will know that they belong and that they demonstrate our values, and that we are underpinned in an approach to human rights, and that we deliver the highest standard of service. So before I finish, I just wanted to touch on the so what part of that. So are we welcoming, inclusive and representative? Well, I would like to have been able to keep that answer as just a yes, but of course there's a lot of experiences across our communities internally and externally. But what I will say is our culture dashboard that we now have is starting to give us an insight into representation. It's starting to give us an insight into people's experiences and how our staff demonstrate the values. Early indications from the information and our initial looking at the dashboard is already showing that as far as representation goes, we're seeing increasing representation across all areas, including females, BME staff, white minoritized groups, our LGBTQ+, and indeed officers and staff with disability. That's important because, you know, if we want to be able to continue to hear and listen from the views, our organisation needs to be representative, and we're showing increases in those areas. And alongside that, particularly because we've been looking at the experiences of our female colleagues in particular, that trend continues in promotion. So the females being promoted is continuing to show an upward trend. Again, really, really important. And then if we think about the experience, our staff survey last year, culture came out really highly around the feelings of our staff. Now, over 11,000 people completed that survey, over half our organisation, and they are telling us, you know, if you're looking at scores, over 70%, which means high levels of agreement of our staff feel that as an organisation, leaders are creating positive and inclusive environments. That's a positive, but of course the mathematicians will know that that still leaves 30% who don't feel that way. So there's always work to be done. And then in terms of a sense of belonging and demonstrating our values, our survey captures that our staff have a real sense that, and we're seeing really positive measures around that sense of belonging and demonstration of values. And the area I do want to draw out is that is particularly relevant for our female staff and colleagues. You know, that when you look at the 18 questions in our survey that were linked to the culture dashboard and linked to how we feel about culture, 16 out of the 18 of them our females score more positively. That doesn't mean to say that everyone's experience is positive, but it means that we are making progress in the direction that we said that we wanted to make. And then as we move on to thinking about finally our human rights approach to deliver the highest standard of service, gosh, I could talk for a long time around some of the work that we are doing in this space, predominantly led under our work of the Refreshed Communities pillar. But we've really invested in an approach to our equality and human rights impact assessments. We've got dedicated staff working in that area. We've sought the support of a human rights advisor. We actually had a workshop on Tuesday training staff on their understanding, because it's not about it being a process, it's about a behaviour. Are people thinking about impact and impact across our diverse communities internally and externally? You've heard already about the Independent Policing Advisory Council. They finished their 3 onboarding sessions, and we're getting straight to work very soon around being able to continue to support us as our critical friends and being able to help us work through what are often really challenging situations and scenarios where there is no obvious answer, but being able to work that through with that expertise and advice is really encouraging. We've done work with our Community Advisor Programme that you've probably heard before, but refreshed our Community Advisor Programme for the first time, having Black and African community advisors to help support us, now also supported by community relation specialists, dedicated staff to help us as an organisation to continue to listen, to continue to understand, are we connecting to our communities, and actually those teams are very much connected to local divisions and local police and supporting some real challenging scenarios and some tragic scenarios, not least a recent murder in Dundee, and being able to bring all of that together to understand, are we connecting in the way, it's not just about connected, but in the way that adds reassurance and builds trust within often seldom heard communities. And again, we've continued to develop our ability to understand that connection through an electronic community engagement form, where we're able to now start to understand how we're connecting across our communities and map that out. And when we think, I was obviously hearing the discussion around protest, but how do we understand community cohesion? What are we doing now in peacetime, as it were, that enables us to be able to say we're having the right conversations and building that trust? And I just want to finish by saying, because they're only some examples, of course, but I'll finish by where I started. Culture change does take time, but if you're asking me, having been 36 years in policing, are we heading in the right direction and are we making progress? Then the answer from me is a wholeheartedly and a resounding yes, we are. There is much more that we need to do. There is much more that we need to continue to keep that drive and momentum with. But I guess what I would say is that you can be assured that our foundations are absolutely secure around the investment that the Chief has made to this programme of work. And I do believe that the Policing Together programme is a means by which we will deliver the Chief's vision, that we will deliver the safer communities, our less crime, our supported victims and our thriving workforce. So I'm happy to go through individual elements of the report, but I knew you would have had the chance to read it, and I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavour of some of that work that has been ongoing. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And before I open it up to our board members, I'm going to ask Tom Halpin, Chair of People Committee and Policing Together, to comment. Give us your reflections, Tom, please.
Yeah, it is reflections, and thanks very much, ACC Payne and Chief Constable and the team for the obvious commitment that's in your presentation today. If you really want to know the commitment of the organisation, they would say follow the money, and and where you're talking, etc. We have seen the realignment of a whole policing division to the work of Policing Together from what was previously policing partnerships and community wellbeing. So there's a whole structural shift as well. We've seen a change in the police leadership, executive leadership team, with a dedicated chief officer. So there's that visible shift as well. We've seen the redesign of our, as we've talked about here, our Police Advisory Council, previously independent advisory groups, etc. So a refresh of the community side of this as well. So I think that there's undoubted progress, and we're now starting to see evidence, data coming through in the cultural dashboard. These are really difficult issues, and you could be argued you don't really get to the end of the road because there's a new experience and you have to react from that. The one area that I would want to emphasise how I think this is beginning to become an exemplar in policing is actually, if you were to look at Policing UK, you won't see many other organisations declaring the fundamental issues that has been declared here around discrimination, whether that's racial, whether it's in misogyny, wherever it is. So there's the ownership of the issue is very evident here in this organisation. It's hard to find a benchmark in terms of structures or action plans, etc. So that itself tells you there's something different here that's ongoing. So and if you look at the issues you're dealing with, most of these issues will have pressure groups, they'll have campaign groups, they'll have real people who passionately believe in it. Therefore, those issues will always bubble to the surface. It looks as though you're not dealing with it. But actually, you have to look through that and look at what we've been hearing today. So as a reflection of having frankly, the privilege of chairing Policing Together oversight and engaging with it in a little way, not an operational way, I sit here with a high degree of confidence today that we're making progress. So just appreciation.
Thank you very much. Now, I've got some board members who have indicated to me they wish to ask a question. I'm going to go to Chris first of all.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, ACC Peyton, for taking us through those highlights in the report. Obviously, I've also had the opportunity to consider this in the context of the Policing Together Oversight Board, and like Tom, I take a great deal of assurance from what's here and what you have said. There's a lot of detail here, obviously, and I do have confidence that we're moving in the right direction. And rather than but, I want to draw out perhaps some of the areas of challenge in that respect. And so I'm looking particularly at the data from Your Voice Matters and also the community data. So you write, leaders create positive and inclusive working environments, 70%. However, then we contrast that a wee bit with our culture fosters a call-out culture, equipping to challenge inappropriate behaviours, 52%. Leaders call out inappropriate comments, 65%, so just below. So there's definitely some further progress to be made there. As you say, this takes time, and the Chief Constable referred earlier in her remarks to the importance of calling out unacceptable behaviours. And so it's really just to draw out the work, which I know is referred to in your report, that is taking place to do the action part of that, to improve that data. And I guess similarly in terms of the user experience data and the Your Police survey data, again we see some contrast, don't we? So satisfied or very satisfied the way officers treated people when attending an incident, 80%. That's really, really welcome. Then we look at some of the figures in terms of confidence at large, and we see some perhaps areas of concern there, down to 41% for strongly agreed or agreed confidence in police in the local area. And again, it would be helpful to draw out some of the work that's going on to take that further in the right direction. And I particularly welcome, for example, the reference to the community engagement work, the citizens panel with LGBTQ citizens, which I think is a really good example of just one example of that. So perhaps if you could draw out the action that's being taken in those areas, it would be really helpful for us to hear, I think.
Thanks, Chris. And I'll start with the first one as it links to our internal aspect, and then move on to the user satisfaction. As I mentioned at the outset, the point of us doing that, the listening and proactively seeking to understand people's experiences, was so that we could get into a position to say, well, what is the institutional part of it? So the institutional part is the part that we need to look at around our structures and our processes and our practice. But the impact is a relational one. The impact is how our staff feel. And as a result of that work, that's where we had our 4 pillars. So right from the outset of our Policing Together strategy, we recognise that leadership's where we need to focus our efforts. Training is where we need to focus our efforts. Preventions and communications, and there's been a whole programme of activity that has been ongoing, and particularly as it relates to the staff, and I'll speak specifically at that because I wouldn't have time to go into all of the activity that sits under all of those pillars, but assurance again that the progress under those initial pillars was reported through the Policing Together Oversight Group. But I've been, along with my colleagues, a firm believer that knowing that we need to call out inappropriate behaviour is one thing. Giving our staff the skills to be able to do that is something else. And DCC Connors already touched on one of the programmes that we've been using that touches on that Act, Don't React. It's about how do we, as individuals, understand how we react in particular situations, what's actually going on in us physiologically that enables us to regain and regulate our own behaviour, so that we're able to then regulate other people's behaviour, so that we can think about having a conversation that we anticipate might be quite challenging because it's going to involve an element of conflict. How do we do that in a way that doesn't damage relationships? So programmes like Act, Don't React. We've obviously got a whole range of other CPD opportunities, deconstructing discrimination, how to to utilise active listening. All of them are designed to be able to help our staff. And the important part of that, aligned to that, is the leadership element. What are we giving our leaders? Your Leadership Matters programme is about being able to demonstrate that leaders, we do set the tone in the environment. Some people say, well, we want leaders with an open door policy. Well, why do we need to have the door open? Are our leaders out and being visible and where they need to be, and being able to help them understand that tone? So a whole programme of work has been done to be able to support and develop our staff to have the confidence, to have the skills to engage, and the confidence to know that we're going to do it. So the figures that you've drawn out are absolutely right, Chris, and we would want to continue to see progress in that area. As it links to our user satisfaction, there's a couple of things that I would draw out first and foremost as a divisional commander. Previously in Lothians and Scottish Borders, it was really important for me to understand people's experience of policing and what that meant for policing in my area, so that aside of national programmes and work, what do you need to do locally that's going to improve some of that activity? But part of the important, again, of that information is to see, is there any disparity? Are we comfortable as to that level of satisfaction, and or is there disparity? And you've drawn out quite clearly where there is disparity, where we're actually saying, well, our colleagues or our communities from LGBTQ+, have a less positive experience of policing. And you mentioned, Chris, so as again, Policing Together, closing the title, working with our engagement and insights team, they've looked at a new way to engage that community through the LGBTQ Citizens Panel, which, just very briefly, was the bringing together of 27 individuals, randomly selected, supported by independent recruiters, to come together and ask the thorny question again about what policing can do to change and to improve and build trust with the LGBTQ plus community. That's the first time we've engaged in that way with a group, and very recently we held a workshop where 9 of those panel members were able to come and share their 16 recommendations. And again, the importance of that is that will be mapped into our work, but again, it's showing a new way of being able to engage with communities who are seldom heard. And that also aligns to some of the work that we've been doing with our young people and our youth engagement team. So a whole programme of activity. And the point about the data is when you bring all of that together, the sum of all the parts helps you see where do we want to focus their attention. And that's why we were able to do that, and starting with the LGBTQ Citizens Panel, but using that methodology to extend out to others.
Yes.
Apologies, just to come in and follow up from what Katrina's saying. In terms of some of the local feedback and being able to feed it through, so we've got the national to the local, particularly in C Division, they review the feedback from the surveys every month to look at where the particular interest areas are, how does that feed into what they're sensing from the communities, and therefore monthly they can look at where do they need to put their energy and where that feedback's coming. The same in K Division, they combine their user experience surveys with community council meetings, speaking to elected members, some of the social media posts, and again, they look at it in a really holistic way so they can feed that back in. And just to highlight on L Division, they've got cards with a QR code for the public survey. They're really trying to push some of that engagement. And again, looking at every social media post, linking back to key areas of confidence. So it doesn't just sit in the kind of policing together space, it really is being drawn into divisions and being acted on as well. Thank you.
You content, Chris?
Yes, thank you very much. Really helpful responses, and I take a great deal of assurance from that, and look forward to continuing to work with you to make further progress. Thank you.
Catherine, do you have a quick follow-up? All right, sorry. I thought it was a follow-up on that. I'm going to go to Angela then.
Thank you, and I think DCC Connors has covered the first question that I had, which was about the dissemination of that feedback, particularly on user experience to divisions. But I think you've covered that with the examples that you've given, so thank you. A second one in relation to the community engagement, it ties in with Chris. And I should say thank you, first of all, for the really comprehensive nature of the report. I think it just it does demonstrate both the commitment and the actions that are being taken as a result of what you're finding. So the LGBTQ plus panel I thought was really welcomed, as were the two youth engagement posts that you mentioned in the report. And there's also 3 community relations specialists. How is the service, possibly through these individuals, using other established networks to find out what the experience is or the perception is of policing in Scotland? Because that's a great resource, it's quite a small resource. So how are we using other established networks to gather that intelligence that then informs the action that we might take? And my second question is it too early, or are there specific examples that you can point to that where things have changed as a result of these interventions, either the panel or the posts being established?
Thank you for your question and comment. So I think, I suppose even just if you think about the title Policing Together, the clues in that, you know, it has to be about partnerships. It has to be about our continuing to engage with already established networks and voices. And we would do that in a number of ways. We'll do that proactively, depending on, you know, the issue and or the challenges that we're experiencing. But we also do that in a formal way through our equality and human rights impact assessment. So we continue to build those connections that enable us to understand lived experience. If I use just another example, when we did our corporate parenting plan as an example, it's through established networks with our youth engagement team and our young people that we're able to understand the lived experience of children who helped shape our corporate parenting plan. So our team have a responsibility for both strategic partnerships and those relationships, but also about, and that's where the community engagement tool is really important, how does that link at a local level so that we've got that connection all the way through? And then how do we understand, which is the key part of it, how do we understand how our community feels? And there's a number of ways, we've touched on some of them there through the surveys, through the feedback that we get, through our forums for community advisors and our community relations specialists, through our independent policing advisory council as well, are all means. And routinely through the engagement, we continue to do a communities tension monitoring report. Again, that supports our understanding of, are we connecting in a way that's adding value and trust. In terms of what's changed as a result, I think part of the work that I've been doing together with the team has, again, we talk about bringing this to life, has been doing divisional visits and being able to go round to connect our community relations specialists. So that's an aim, but who are they and what do they offer, and what do they offer at local divisions? And so we've been doing a programme of face-to-face visits to go round and test out, is what we are trying to achieve manifesting itself into support at a local community level. And I touched on it, but I mentioned the horrendous, tragic murder in Dundee, but we were able to, because we'd already met with the team literally a few days before we'd had that divisional visit, the connections are made, and they were able to build on that to be able to support both our staff and our communities in being able to build those relationships and respond in a way that added trust and confidence.
Content, thank you. Pauline, and then Katrina.
Many thanks for your report. Obviously a huge amount of work going on, and I welcome the ambitions set out within it, particularly around our equality outcomes by 2029. Are we on track to achieve them, and what do you think the key challenges are going to be in terms of getting us to where we need to be, recognising the progress that's been made to date?
So my answer is, are we on track? Then I would say absolutely yes, we are on track, because we've built that solid foundation, which has been supported by the investment, that Tom's also referred to. And with all of that, and what that allows us to do is to not be distracted and to continue to be able to say, you know, we do need to invest in this because it's critical to how people feel about policing. It's critical to trust and therefore critical to survival as a service. So, yes, we are on track. Do I think, and what do I think the challenges are? The challenges are, of course, we're not short of you know, issues to respond and react to. But all I can go with, having brought all of that information together, is to be able to say we have that investment, we have that support, and therefore being able to see, and I think that's the important part, when you start to see the progress, you build that optimism and hope. And that's why continuing to test ourselves to say, are we making the impact that we intended, will allow us the opportunity to continue and just use the phrase I often use, but act more cohesively in that space rather than reacting to some of the challenges. And when we think about that as it relates to protest activity and community cohesion, this work is so fundamental to us doing it. And all I can say is that we do have the support, not just of the Chief Constable, but of course of members of this board.
Okay, thank you. Katerina?
Thank you very much for the report, for the presentation. I think this is a really good report. I absolutely agree with Tom's earlier statement around the fact that I don't think anybody can be in any doubt that Police Scotland is taking this very seriously, considering the amount of resources and space and airtime that this is getting. So I absolutely echo what Tom has said, so many thanks for that. I have got a question around impartiality in policing. You touched on this a little bit in the report as well. And I'm just quite keen to kind of get your views because, again, being cognizant of the fact that as you're looking to correct some of the previous discrimination, there may be a necessity to take positive action, for example, but that obviously always needs to be balanced with that impartiality in policing. So now I don't think the two things are absolutely. I don't think they're not compatible. But you know, I would just really welcome your reflections on how do you balance that between being inclusive, listening, potentially taking positive action, etc., but at the same time making sure that there is no perception of a reduction in impartiality.
Thanks for your comments and for your questions. So I think for me, it's important to emphasise impartiality in policing is not new. You know, that's what we have had to do since we took the oath. In fact, that's why it's mentioned in the oath. It's certainly come to the fore more because we are operating in an environment where there are often polarising perspectives and views, and therefore understanding impartiality in that context is really important. So that's the first point, that, you know, police officers act with impartiality, and it's our expectation that they do that. When we start to look at it in terms of some polarising views and sex and gender work that we've been doing is a really good example. It's about being able to, if we're not prepared to connect and listen, then we won't understand people's perspectives. So it's understanding the purpose of the engagement. It's understanding why are we connecting. Is it to listen? Is it to understand? And then using that to be able to demonstrate, if policing has to take a position on something, that we've done that in a way that has taken cognizance of views. And it's not just, of course, about majority views. It's about the views across, because we keep going back to policing is for everyone. So everyone has to feel that they have had an opportunity to contribute to you know, our process and our practice. So it is a difficult landscape for sure, but it's not a new concept for us in policing to be operating with impartiality.
I think that's given a good conversation, a good discussion, and very helpful, I think, for the authority to hear that. I know the bulk of our work, the engine rooms of our scrutiny are through our committee structure, but it's been very helpful. Katrina, thank you to see your enthusiasm and your commitment, and I think your upfront recognition that we're making progress, but we still have a way to go, and keep moving that on. So very much appreciate all the work that you and the team are doing in that. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to hand straight over to DCC Spears, I think, on climate change.
Thanks very much, Chief. Chair, I will be really quick because I have brought with me an absolute expert on sustainability, and what I'd like to say is that the work that Jen has done over the last 12 months and actually over the last few years has been incredible, and she brings an energy just in the same way as ACC Peyton brings to policing together to sustainability. And I think going forward, Jen's working relationship alongside our Chief Estates Officer and our Financial Officer will be incredibly important. So I just want to acknowledge fantastic progress that Jen makes, and I'll let her just present the report to you this morning.
Thank you, Chair. I am here today, obviously, to present the Public Bodies Duties Climate Change Report for Police Scotland and the SPA. This is a legislative requirement under the Climate Change Act. So this is our climate change report for the year ending 24-25. As you can see, and obviously we have presented this report to the board before, you can see that it's a mixed bag of results this year. Unfortunately, our overall carbon emissions have increased this year. It's the first time in 10 years, actually, that we have seen an increase in our baseline emissions. So our baseline emissions for this year are 39,105 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent, and that's an increase on last year's report of 426. So it's not, in the grand scheme of things, we're not talking about a significant retrograde step, but we do have to take account of it, and I think that this is a key point in the estates and master plan strategy and also the fleet and EV transformation strategy to really take stock and think about how we move forward with our new environmental strategy that will be our sustainability strategy that will be published next year, and how we take steps to really address this and make sure that we don't go backwards again next year. I think there is good news within the report. We can see from the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, which relate to our fossil fuel consumption and our electricity consumption, that we have again reduced our consumption and our emissions. But what seems to be happening at the moment is we are being overtaken by Scope 3 emissions. So that's anything else that we have to account for: waste, water, travel, and we are increasingly being required to report more and more sources under that Scope 3 emission budget line, if you like. And what that's doing is it's slowly creeping up as our Scope 2 and 1 emissions are reducing. So we're not reducing our Scopes 1 and 2 enough to take account of that increase in Scope 3 emissions. For the rest of the report, we are happy that it reflects a strategic evolution in how we deal with climate change and sustainability across policing in Scotland. And you can see that if we look at the climate change reports from 2019 onwards, you can really see an increase in the granularity of the data that we are reporting. And that, to me, gives me confidence that, you know, it's down to that old scientific adage, you cannot control that which you do not measure. And because we are measuring more and we are more aware of all of our emission sources, we can then put in place procedures and strategies that take action on that. And indeed, you know, across the piece of environmental strategy implementation from 2019, you can see that we have made significant inroads from 49,925 tonnes down to 39,000 tonnes, and indeed from the inception of Police Scotland, where the baseline was 70,000. So we are making good progress. Obviously, my request today is that through discussion you're satisfied with the content of the report, and we would ask for the Chief Executive's signature in order that we can submit it as the validated report to Scottish Government.
Okay, that's really helpful, Jen. Thank you very much indeed. I have a few board members who have questions. I'm going to hand over to Pauline first of all.
Thanks very much for your report, really helpful. And notwithstanding the slight increase in emissions last year, I think, you know, as you said, the overall trend is impressive in terms of the reductions made since 2013-14. So well done to everybody involved. You mentioned work going on at the moment in terms of Estates Master Plan and fleet and EV strategies. Will those additional measures that you want to develop within those strategies enable you to get on track towards the 2038 strategy of zero direct emissions and the 2045 strategy of net zero emissions. Is that the intent, and what will it take?
Thank you very much. Yes, I am actually positive that we will be able to do that. I think that the Estates Master Plan has been developed with the sustainability team, and what we were able to do was present them with information based on extensive feasibility studies that we have undertaken in support with the Scottish Government on a range of issues that we will have to address, such as zero carbon heating systems, fabric first approach, which is again a cornerstone of the sustainability in buildings guidance from the Scottish Government. These are the things that we've put forward, and we can see it reflected within the master plan. And indeed, the work that the Estates Project team is taking forward at the moment, they are in constant communication with us as to what the best practice would be in buildings. We understand that it won't always be about what we want, because there are difficult decisions to be made in relation to funding, and funding can only go so far. But we will also be working with the Scottish Government to maximise any additional funding through schemes like the GPZ scheme, Greening the Public Sector Estate Development Scheme, to make sure that we can gain additional funding to help with that. Again, we also know that there was a slowdown in the Fleet EV transformation programme this financial year. We're hoping that that will step up again, and that we will play a key part in that programme. In addition to that, the sustainability team has been given direct funding to operate our own projects at the moment. That includes building energy management systems, which can play a huge part in reducing gas consumption within estates by closely controlling how we monitor and how we operate heating provision and hot water provision. And also we have put forward, based on GPZ's funding, where we successfully updated the lighting system across Dalmarnock site, where we've seen a reduction in our electricity consumption because of that. We want to roll out that LED upgrade programme to the rest of the estate, and we're working hand in hand with the estates to do that. So yes, I am confident that we can achieve it, albeit that unfortunately we're not going to achieve our environmental strategy target of 35% by next year. I think we have tried hard, but we understand that there are limiting factors that have prevented us from doing that. But I am confident about the 2045 target.
Thank you very much. Alistair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jen, for the report. I read it with great interest, and like my colleague Pauline, I would like to acknowledge the significant progress that Police Scotland have made. And actually that little explanation you provided about that move to Scope 3, getting the insights there and developing strategies, I think that's something that's really important. I've got two questions I'd like to ask. Part of the state strategy is disposal, which can reduce the carbon footprint of Police Scotland, but doesn't necessarily reduce the carbon footprint pan-Scotland. So what thoughts are given in your disposal of properties? You know, have we just handed the problem to somebody else? Or is that part of your thinking going forward? And my second question is, just wondered if you could expand a little bit on the work that's been done around adaptation, because clearly, as it says in the report, this is something that's going to be significant as our climate changes, even if we stopped carbon emissions today. So how prepared are Police Scotland for short, medium, long-term climate change with our property portfolio?
Thank you very much. In terms of disposal, yes, we do have to recognise that there's almost a carbon accountancy feature to this. It is an efficiency measure to dispose of buildings which are inefficient, that are possibly sited in the wrong place, that are too big for our purposes, particularly the old air station. You could see there where a significant amount of the building wasn't being used, but we still had to heat it to some degree. So there is an efficiency element there. In terms of disposal of buildings, yes, there will be some buildings that will be handed over to other organisations. And yes, it's not our problem anymore. It's not our building anymore. We won't have to report on it. the organisation that takes that over, if it is public sector, it will have to account for it. My understanding that in several cases, the disposed buildings, for example, the building in Finniston, the Argyll Street station, will probably be demolished because it's a building that isn't fit for purposes for the owner, and that a new structure will be built on that site. So yes, we do recognise that. I think it's one of these things that with buildings you dispose of them and you get the carbon bonus once, and that's it. Because what you have to do is you have to readdress your boundary in order to take account of the fact that you compare with the reality of your boundary as it is. So within 1 year you will have a carbon bonus because you've disposed of a building. You will have to then really think about the fact that that boundary then reflects the fact that you have that reduced building and that you no longer have to account for it, but then you have to take account of other issues. So you continually have to reduce in that sort of plan, do, check, act, which is one of the reasons why our environmental and sustainability strategies only exist for limited periods of years, because 4 years ago our estate looked very, very different and our boundary looked very different. So we have to renew our strategy in order to reflect who we are at the moment, to fairly represent what we are doing in terms of carbon reduction. In terms of adaptation, I would say that we have to look at it from an organisational viewpoint and an operational viewpoint, and I know that DCC Connors has lots of information on the operational viewpoint. From an organisational viewpoint, we have an adaptation strategy and also an assessment tool. And that means that what we can do is we can look at stations all across Scotland and be able to assess them for climate impacts now, but 30 years in the future, which is the standard way of looking at climate change. It's a period of 30 years. To see what those buildings will have to contend with, because in some cases on the West Coast it may be heavy rain, it may be storms, but certainly within the North East Coast, as we can see at the moment, it might be constraints on water as well as heating, overheating. So what we have to do is work with the estate's master plan to ensure that when we're thinking about refurbishing now, we're refurbishing a building for 30 years in the future to make sure that it's resilient in the future, and that does lend itself to operational policing as well, because if our buildings are resilient, then we can continue to do our job in the face of extreme weather.
And just to add some from a kind of operational context, I don't need to tell everybody about the wildfires, heat, seasonal really nice weather, and then we have storms, we have rain, flooding. So the panacea of climate change is obvious to everybody. Police Scotland has recently hosted the first multi-agency strategic incident management course, which is around multi-agency groups, blue light, local authorities, NHS partners, all of those people who in a multi-agency response will be impacted by any of those factors we're talking about in terms of climate change. And it's the strategic management of those incidents that's really important, not just at the time, but how do we then go into recovery? Because once the incident is done and everybody says, right, okay, we need to go home, we're done with our immediate response, there is always a period of recovery, and it's really important that we identify that as well. In terms of our police incident command training, it was sitting at inspector level, but if you look at some of our rural communities on the islands, actually it might be a PS or even just a constable that is there at the time. So being able to have that training around how you deal with incidents, what's the criticality, and again working with multi-agency. So we have reduced that level down in terms of inspectors. We do regular police and multi-agency exercising of all the major incident plans, and there's been a number of workshops and specific weather related testing and exercising as well, which is really important. Debriefs, we constantly feed back in debriefs. 2004, the A9 incident where we had 300 cars trapped in the snow, that's something that's been fed back in. Are we now prepared for that type of thing to happen? And again, as a multi-agency response, often it's the police that lead some of these, because we're seeing a reduction in some of the resilience, staff working in the partnerships, that the local partnerships are so important, going up all the way to the national. But I think it is something to highlight that we do need to make sure that we all invest in the resilience partnerships. Just a couple of other pieces. We're actually working with academia. Rob Shepherd from the Highlands and Islands working with academia to try and predict where some of the climate changes are going to come, and therefore what does our operational response need to look like. We feed that into things like our uniform group. What uniform are our staff going to need? You know, we've talked about buildings, so it's not just the kind of criticality of our response. We look particularly at our business continuity in relation to all of the different weather. It's really important as a 24/7 response service that we have good business continuity plans, and we're able then to be assured that if the weather hits, we can maintain our operational business as well as be able to respond. There's a number of things going on with the Scottish Resilience Partnership at a national level, and there's a number of different websites, the Local Authority Climate Change Service, which actually gives you micro examples of where the climate is changing across Scotland in different areas. So yes, we've changed our training. We're very focused on multi-agency response. We're very conscious that the resilience areas need to have the right resources in it, and we're flexing our response to be able to deal with the changes that have been discussed. Thank you.
Content?
I actually really appreciate the responses that I've received here. It's certainly aided my understanding of what this report is actually, the importance of this report, which I knew, but the importance of it in the context of maintaining Police Scotland as a service that can deliver for the people of Scotland. So really helpful. Thank you.
Angela?
Thank you. Yeah, and again, thank you. It's a really good read, as Mary said earlier. Could I just ask, Jane, you mentioned the resilience partnerships, which are really critical for Police Scotland, given some of the challenges that you're facing. In the face of the budget constraints that we're seeing across the public sector, are you seeing any difference in the level of resources that are evident in other partners? I'm just thinking about the reliance that you'll place on those that are working particularly at a more local level. And my second question for Jane really is, this strategy is coming to in its last year, so 2006 there'll need to be some kind of refresh of it. What's the plan for that? What's the process for it? You've talked extensively about the Estates Master Plan and the links with that, which is really encouraging. I'm just wondering about that wider transformation that's also underway within Police Scotland, that will have an impact on our performance in this area.
Thank you. So if I touch on the first part, I can talk about some of the transformation, and perhaps Jane would be able to come in, or others. As I've said, I think we're starting to see pressure on all multi-agency partners in terms of resilience. We're seeing pressure on dedicated staff who are helping coordinate resilience and are sitting in the background making sure that our plans are ready across multi-agency space. I think there's pressure within Scottish Government resources in terms of being able to support some of the resilience as well. So I think it's something that everybody's really alive to. One of the things that is being done through the Scottish Resilience Partnership is looking through a programme of change and how the category 1 and 2 responders, what's the capability and capacity and gaps within those responders, and therefore what coordination needs to be done in other areas, and are there other partners that need to be brought in. So I think the pressure is definitely there across the system, but there is work ongoing at the moment to identify what the capacity capability gaps are, and therefore how do we provide better assurance that collectively we're able to manage that. And I think in terms of transformation, I'll pass to Jen in a second. You know, we've talked about the Estates Master Plan. We've talked about the fact that Donna has come in. That join up between all of the different areas of transformation, rather than sitting in isolation of any particular thing. How does it affect estates? How does it affect digital? You know, where does our climate change and the changes that are being driven through there? It is all part of the matrix that's considered when we look at the transformation portfolio and the work that we're taking forward. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think partnerships is going to be a really big aspect of the new sustainability strategy. For example, this sustainability strategy will be a joint partnership between Police Scotland and SPA to make sure that we fully capture the concerns of the SPA and the very specific nature of the work that the SPA does and the types of buildings and spaces that it runs, because it is so specialist, and it has been really, really fruitful so far. And we would definitely recognise Sam Curran in the way that he has supported us through this. It's been really, really beneficial to see. So I think from in terms of internal partnerships, it's been very good. The sustainability strategy will have a wider focus. Obviously, when we think about our emissions, our largest emissions, you could chunk them into thirds. It's gas, it's electricity, and it's fossil fuel for fleet. And that's pretty much all of it. The other emissions are pretty ancillary. They're still important, but those are the big issues. And that means that what we have to do is focus on translating what it says in the Estates Master Plan into a carbon total and carbon reduction, and doing the same for fleet as well. But we're also going to be looking at those Scope 3 emissions, which means we have to work with procurement in relation to supply chain emissions, because that's a really, really complex area, and we are definitely going to have to rely on expertise, be it software that we buy in or be it external advice from bodies that understand supply chain analysis in order to provide that. We're also going to have to think about corporate transport, but we're also going to have to think about partnerships beyond Police Scotland in terms of local authorities and their local heat and energy efficiency schemes, where we should be looking and taking advantage of any district heat networks that are under construction so that we can hook up to them. And this all leads to the fact that we were invited to be part of the Sustainable Scotland Network Steering Group, which means we sit in a steering group for all public sector bodies in Scotland in relation to sustainability. And what that does is gives us a route into sharing our experience and knowledge, but also gaining knowledge as well, and being, you know, there right at the very outset to make sure that we take opportunities. All of that will go into the sustainability strategy, as well as issues such as training. A really big issue for us. I think we need to grow our awareness within the organisations, SPA and Police Scotland. A key example would just be waste. We are undertaking a waste procedure and programme at the moment where we're collecting data about waste behaviours across the estate, and what we can see is that people are unsure of how to discard their waste, and possibly we need to improve in the infrastructure as well. So that's a key example of where training set within the new sustainability strategy will help us. So we understand that there are hard measures and soft measures that will need to be addressed.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Mary?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, my questions has largely been answered. Some very, very comprehensive responses to the questions, and I thank you for that. It's a really interesting report, and the bit I was particularly interested in was the adaptation strategy and the other strategies that are developed to help Police Scotland ensure resilience in the event of whatever might happening. And clearly in the last few years we've seen everything from drought to flooding, from heat waves and wildfires to, the big freeze. I think, was it called the Beast from the East? So we've had all of that, and we've had motorways grinding to a halt, motorists sitting all night on the roads. Everything has happened and will undoubtedly happen again. So our interest is in ensuring that you're very well prepared for that and that you can deal with whatever happens. And that's a big challenge. But beyond that, we have to ensure that our partners are also very well prepared. And I think the responses we've had would suggest that there's a lot of work going on at national and local level to ensure resilience amongst those local resilience partnerships. And that's really good. My experience is that in some areas are very well prepared for these things, and other areas less so. So I would want some assurance about the work you're doing, perhaps in those areas where there still needs to be more of a focus on this work to ensure resilience across Scotland. But I suppose a more immediate issue for us is ensuring that as we go into another winter, we can say that Police Scotland is operationally prepared for whatever lies ahead. And some assurances around that would also be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I've talked about some of the areas. I think we would accept that some areas, perhaps on the Highlands and Islands, the north, who are more used to some of those extreme weathers and some of the borders, have better plans in place. That is something through our local resilience, but sitting in our OSDR operations centre under Alan Waddell, they continually review that, and through the testing and exercising, rather than just focusing on the same places, they bring in other areas to make sure that they are where they need to be, and that debrief element, I think, that comes in. I think in terms of operationally ready, all agencies that work within this sphere are very good at that initial critical response, and we do see it. I think I would draw back to the demand pressures and the resilience that we're facing with our staff and the pressures that we're under as we go into the winter. We have the plans, we know how the structures will stand up. The impact then is on our staff, often have to work longer shifts. Yeah. We then often have to cancel the rest days in order to make sure that we've got the resilience we need, either to keep the roads or support different areas or rest centres with the local authorities. So, and as I say, it's that recovery piece rather than just the initial bit. We then have a longer tail very often on getting things back, be it a power cut, as I say, or flooding, whatever it is. But the ongoing demands in the organisation means it is likely to be exhausting and tiring for our staff, although we're prepared and ready.
Yes, and often people look particularly to the police, but also to the fire service for the leadership that's required in the event of a critical incident. So it's helpful to understand that your training and exercising is designed to address that as well. So thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
That brings us to the conclusion of our questions. Jen, thank you so much for all of that you do, Chief Constable.
Thank you, Chair. As we finish, I'd like to just put on record my thanks to Jen and the team. So not only does she bring a high degree of expertise in this area, but also leadership skills in terms of engaging the organisation in this important area of business, but on occasions probably isn't necessarily always in the absolute forefront of our mind. But she brings it to life. I'm sure you would agree. She brings it to life. She's engaging, and most importantly, it's that leadership in this space. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks,
yes,
Chair.
Thank you, and we are all the better for it. So thank you very much indeed. That's been helpful. So that draws us to the conclusion of our public meeting, but before we conclude today's business, I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge this the last board meeting of our esteemed Chief Executive and Accountable Officer, Lynn Brown. Lynn, although I would argue she's been a member of the policing family for much of her life, been with us here in policing now for 6 years and formally retires next week. Your contribution as Chief Exec and Accountable Officer have been quite remarkable, Lynn. You've been an absolute driving force in rebuilding the authority as an effective and trusted public body delivering effective financial management oversight and support of policing in Scotland. And during Lynn's tenure, the financial management accounts for policing have received a clean bill of health, no longer the subject of Section 22 reports from the auditors. And I think crucially, our governance and oversight arrangements are now widely regarded as best practice across the public sector, and we are all the stronger and more credible because of it. All of Lynn's career, she's been a highly effective public servant, outstanding leadership style and unique set of skills, and certainly on a personal level, as a board member, vice chair and a new chair during your tenure, I have been very, very grateful and benefited from your support and wise counsel. And as principal advisor to the board, you've helped the board navigate numerous complex and highly challenging issues. You've been a driving force in addressing deficiencies, driving improvement, building a credible and effective organisation that adds value to the overall policing system. You've also inspired and influenced members of staff, policing leaders and key stakeholders to embrace a clear culture of effective oversight arrangements for policing in Scotland that have positively influenced public trust and confidence. You are leaving a legacy, you're leaving behind a highly effective and capable team you built, and I know that you have confidence, and certainly the authority has confidence, that they will continue to carry on the good work that you have embedded when you leave under the direction of the next Chief Executive, Chris Brown. So the board wants to thank you for your service. We wish you well for your very well-deserved retirement. So thank you very much and well done. And I'm going to hand over to the Chief Constable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Lynn, been an inspirational public sector leader across Scotland for more than two decades. And you've worked, as colleagues know around the table, in very complex organisations where frontline service is key. We've hugely benefited as Police Scotland in relation to your wisdom and your candour and your direct, forthright approach, which I have always welcomed and our colleagues around the table have. And I think if we look back, there's been, under your tenure, a stability in policing, and it's in no small part to the grip and the focus that you've brought to your role and to this collaboration and this partnership. On a personal level, really grateful for your support and advice to me since joining the organisation in 2023. So on behalf of all our colleagues here and across Police Scotland, you'll be a huge miss, but you leave us in good hands, and thank you for all your hard work and dedication, and we wish you well, and we look forward to working with Chris as he steps into your large shoes. So thank you.
Chair, Chief Constable, thank you so much for your kind comments, which mean a lot to me personally. I've had the privilege of working closely with you both over the last few years in challenging times of rightful, intense public scrutiny, and I've seen up close your hard work and commitment to having the best police service possible for the people of Scotland. And in fact, this sense of common purpose is evident throughout the board, the senior leadership team of Police Scotland and the SPA. And Chair, my view's always been that this forum is the domain of the authority, of the members. My view is my job should be finished before we meet, and therefore I tend to not say very much, as you know, at these meetings, because it's not my job to do so unless you've got questions. But today I'm going to say a bit more, if I may, because I've been reflecting on what I'd like to say at today's meeting as I depart. And I've covered some aspects of in my own report, and I'll obviously be closing by thanking everyone who I've worked with over the years. But I wanted to say something about the governance framework we have, and why it's both necessary and fundamental to promoting public confidence and trust in the policing system. And that's a word we've heard a lot today, those words, public trust and confidence. So in preparation for the best value review, I was having a conversation with a member of staff, in fact it was Barry, and we were talking through the fundamental role of the SPA and its relationship with Police Scotland. And he said something that resonated with me that I had not articulated myself. And that was that we talk about public trust and confidence, but without adding understanding to those, the understanding of policing is difficult to achieve that public trust and confidence. And Barry and I agreed that the governance framework we have of publicly open and transparent authority meetings and committees are always a clear route and a window of opportunity for this understanding to be promoted. The governance structure gives an ability to Police Scotland to explain, particularly when there's a contentious issue, and for the authority to seek assurance and confidence in actions to be taken. And just a quick review of the last year alone sees high-profile issues such as the impact of the hate crime legislation on policing, matters of sex and gender in policing, the introduction of body-worn video, the national conversation and debate around live facial recognition, the Chief Constable's vision for police in 2030, the police response operation portalage to organised gang violence in our communities, and the planning for the police in the Commonwealth Games. And today alone we heard from the Policing Together, and that's another area. So these are all examples of where the government supports and promotes public debate and understanding. And as I said in my report earlier, we are a young but maturing organisation, but this should always be at the forefront of our deliberations and discussions, and we should always learn from our successes and, more importantly, our missed opportunities. Chair, I'd like to finish by thanking the board, the Chief Constable and her team, the SPA Corporate, the Director of Forensics and her team, and her staff, and all the key stakeholders for supporting me over the last 6 years. I wish you all the very best in your future endeavours, especially my successor, Chris Brown, who I know will be supported, as I always was, by the commitment and professionalism of SPA. Thank you.
Lynn, thank you very much.